Hello, everyone. My name is Lauren King. I write about film for the Boston Globe, and it's my pleasure to be here today for the discussion about the documentary Blood on the Wall. I'm thrilled to have the filmmakers with us for this GlobeDocs presentation. We have Sebastian Junger and Nick Quested, who co-directed Blood on the Wall, and welcome to both of you. Thank you so much for being here. There is so much history and compelling information in this documentary. My first question is just, did you know going in where your focus would be, or did things change as you went along? How did you respond to just the scope of this, which is so enormous, and yet you get at so much? I mean, it's a dense documentary, but my God, what information is there? So just a little bit about how you approached it initially and how it might have changed or evolved in the course of filmmaking. How long was the process? Either one of you, one can start.
So the process was about 18 months, and we always had this idea to interweave migration and narcoeconomics. But what was a surprise to us was the caravan forming. So we'd targeted, or we'd found a few families that were in southern Mexico that were planning to move north, and we found some families that were still in Honduras, but we hadn't accounted for the caravan. And while we were in Chiapas researching the Actial massacre and meeting with the Mesa from Actial, we heard the caravan, and Nat Geo had told us certain things that were sacrosanct, like never travel at night and never never drive over mountain passes in cars. Well, we had to drive from Actial to Tecanoman, which is about 200 miles as the crow flies, and about 600 miles if you drive. And we left at 8 o'clock in the evening. Wow. So we were just lucky enough that the caravan was forming at the time, and we had the right crew to follow it from that point.
Wow. Did you know you were going to focus on the which happened to be several women, particularly, which I found very compelling. Their stories are just absolutely harrowing. Did you talk to different people that were making that journey and settle on the ones that we follow through the course of the film?
Well, we knew we wanted to follow a family, and we knew we wanted to find some unaccompanied minors. And then we actually followed another 2 or 3 groups that might have had stronger male characters, but didn't have as compelling coverage. Mm-hmm. So particularly Ludi, with we never really went out of our way to find a young female that was unaccompanied. She was just the standout person in the group. And I had a connection with Ludi because I used to make a lot of hip hop videos, and she loves hip hop. So that was like our little way to intersect.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I'll just jump in and say that a lot of decisions also get made in the editing room. I mean, you sort of sweep up as much video as you can, because you're never sure what you're going to use and what's going to be relevant. And as a journalist, and documentary filmmakers are journalists, you really have to be careful that the characters you pick not only are sort of engaging for the viewer, but also represent reality. I mean, you can skew any story by carefully cherry picking your subjects. And so there's a really basic honesty that you, as a journalist, you really have to abide by, that the compelling characters that you wind up with also represent a deeper truth. And this truth was coming at a real political sort of hot moment in America. I mean, of course, there was all this talk about immigrants and the wall and all this stuff. So we were trying to document an extremely complicated situation, but politically in the US, it was also sort of a moving target. And all of it, there was a lot of political baggage associated with everything we were trying to treat with an objective eye. So it was very, very complicated.
Yeah, yeah. So you were aware of all this discussion and tweeting and whatnot about the caravan, and yet then you see these human stories. I mean, what people are fleeing is, and those the people you chose represent that, as you just said. I mean, and I'm sure you could have found many other examples of that.
Yeah, yeah, and no one wants to leave their home. I mean, that's the thing. Is I feel like it's very easy for Americans, because we have such abundance in this country, to think that anyone coming here is being sort of opportunistic, right? I mean, I sort of understand I understand how people arrive at that conclusion, but nobody wants to leave their home. And so if people do, and if they leave their home on foot, carrying children, opportunists don't do that. It's just too hard, right? Only people who are very, very frightened do that. And I know that from working in Africa and in Afghanistan. I mean, humans are human all over the world. Mm-hmm. And that, to me, that is one of the central things we wanted to communicate, is what's driving this is not opportunism, but desperation.
Yeah.
I mean, and also you could see, I mean, we want to try and communicate that to the audience, but you've got to look at the sort of exoduses from the city nowadays from the pandemic to see how, for the first time, I think you see middle class and richer families starting to make the same decisions that migrants make. They felt scared for their lives being in the city, so they moved. That's, and there's a very distinct parallel to be to examine there.
Mm-hmm. The film is that whole caravan and immigration aspect of it is, I found, so moving and compelling and eye-opening. But what's going on in these countries that you get at in the film is such an important context. The corruption, the complete lawlessness. I mean, I was struck by that statistic that 98% of crimes aren't even solved. So how is there any trust in the institutions there? So was that something you were aware of at the time you were spending there? Whether, like you said, the drug, you were interested in the narco-economics, but were there any surprises for you to find the scope and depth of the corruption and the problems that have just led to people wanting to flee?
Are we surprised by the corruption in Central America? No, I think I just think we need to make people aware of how deep and systematic it is. I mean, you can look at Hernandez, the Hernandez clan in Honduras now, and the brother is being sanctioned by the U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of New York as a narco trafficker. Like, it's systematic. It is the culture. It's not even corruption to a certain extent. It's the system.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And just another word on corruption. I mean, if you work around the world in the poorer countries, in war-torn countries, as my good friend and the amazing journalist Sarah Shays points out, corruption underlies basically all of the world's ills: environmental degradation, illiteracy, narco-terrorism, war, high murder rate. I mean, it's the common denominator in just about every evil that we think we're facing. And so if you work in a country like Mexico or Afghanistan, or in a lot of countries in Africa, and increasingly in the West, what you realize is that, the keystone to all these problems is corruption. Mm-hmm. And so, of course, we went into Mexico. It was no surprise. And I think one of the things that we wanted to do was to portray a system that, okay, it's about Mexico, but actually you could step back a little bit further and realize, oh my God, this actually explains a lot about what the whole world is struggling with.
Right.
I mean, one big shock recently was Genaro Garcia Luna, who was the architect of Calderon's war, mm-hmm. has been indicted and is currently in federal custody in America. Like, this is the drug czar for Calderon, and there was always rumors of it, but now he's in custody and awaiting trial.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Did you experience any resistance from, I mean, you talked to everyone from the drug dealers to the folks in the fields to the officials like Calderon. Was there any resistance to wanting to cooperate with a film that was clearly going to be an expose of some kind? Or did you, did you have to fight to get these interviews or to explain what you were trying to do? Were people worried about cooperating?
Well, I think some people are always worried about cooperating, but, you know, fortunately we had enough time to be patient about creating a relationship with the offices of officials and then being available to go and shoot it at any time. Mm-hmm. So there was some reticence. Some people didn't want to be in the film, but, you know, I think we got the players that we found important.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. When you were talking with the people who were packing the drugs and doing that kind of smuggling work, I mean, were you ever in any danger? Were you both of you have been to war-torn countries, as you just said, and experienced that kind of danger, I know firsthand. But in these situations, you talked about the traveling in the cars at night. But what sorts of risks are there involved in trying to film something like this and talk to the players that you spoke with?
Well, I mean, there's all different types of risk. And when we went to the mountains of the Sinaloa Mountains, we were invited, and we spent you know, a considerable amount of time creating a relationship with those guys before we went. So I didn't feel in any jeopardy in the mountains. Mm-hmm. I think on the border it was a different scenario. I actually felt more uneasy in Phoenix. We were in a hotel room waiting for the money to turn up, and then the money was in a car and it got pulled over by the police because the guy had not made a left turn signal. And these guys had been doing a little cocaine and smoked a little weed, and they'd done a little bit more cocaine and they smoked a little bit more weed, and they did a little bit more cocaine and they smoked a little bit more weed. And so we were like 3 hours in. Mm-hmm. And I started the interview in Spanish, and then I didn't know he spoke English. So then we moved to English a little bit. And then as the car gets pulled over, the whole motel gets lit up with a helicopter, and there's blue lights everywhere. And he's like, "You're the police. Tell me you're not the police." And I'm like, "Listen, mate, I'll just tell you one thing, but me telling you I'm not the police is not really like, you know, the feds might lie to you and have no reason not to lie to you. It's like," and so they found out there was actually a murder of like a drug addict in the next hotel over, but that was a nervous moment.
Wow.
Yeah, I've been in a lot of combat. I'm no longer doing that sort of work, and I couldn't go to Mexico because I'd been expelled by the government some years earlier for investigating something that was sensitive. So Nick, I mean, in this film, I mean, Nick did all of that work, and I got to say, I just want people to realize, like, what he did there and the other people who were working with him was absolutely extraordinary. But I honestly, like, combat. Psychologically, combat feels manageable. That kind of danger where you're not sure if someone's going to kill you in a hotel room, I got to say, I've got no stomach for that. Like, I'm glad I was in the States, and I really can't believe.
I was in the States.
I can't believe the nerve it took on Nick's part to pull off some of this work. It was amazing.
Wow. Oh, that's interesting. So you were expelled. So you weren't able to. Wow. How did it, I mean, I know the two of you co-directed Hell on Earth about Syria a few years back. Was it then, did you decide then about a second project? did this one evolve from that one in any way? How did it just come to be that you would collaborate on Blood on the Wall? The one.
I mean, we made all our films together. So I produced Restrepo for Sebastian and Tim, and then we made a film together about Tim, and then Sebastian went on made The Last Patrol that I helped produce, and then so it was just an extension of you know of the other projects that we've done.
Mm-hmm.
We looked at doing. When we were talking to National Geographic, we talked to Matt Renner and Tim Pastor. We were going to do three countries and then analyze the political issues and find characteristics to explain these. So we were going to do Venezuela, Nicaragua, and Mexico. In the end, we chose just to do Mexico because it's right. You know, Mexico is America's neighbor, and we felt it was the more pressing for American audiences. And also, when the president walked down the golden escalator and then you know, vilified the migrants as rapists and murderers, we felt that needed to be addressed. You know, we wanted to humanize the vilified.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Sebastian, since you weren't able to go to Mexico, as you just pointed out, were you involved with the editing, or as you were seeing what was coming in, what was your role specifically? Because I did write down editing. I wanted to talk about the editing. It was amazingly edited. I mean, to follow these different topics that are in this very complex film is quite amazing.
Yeah, well, thank you. I mean, we had an amazing editing team, and you know, my role was basically co-director, which meant that I was watching material that I had not shot. So at the very least, I had a kind of fresh perspective. You know, when some other films that I've made with Nick, I'd shot a lot of the footage, and so you get attached to stuff that you know you suffered for. But in this particular project, it was all coming to me fresh, and so I would just give I would give Nick and the editing team my feedback on what I thought was strong and what wasn't. And it's any story, if you really research it, will become a big sprawling story. I mean, that's just the nature of research and the nature of the world. And so the trick is to capture the story in an honest way. I mean, you necessarily have to limit what you say, but you have to do that in an honest way. And that's the eternal, and make it compelling, make it something where you just have to see what happens next. And a lot of tragedy is really mundane, frankly, and needs to be seen. But you know, those people who were those migrants, they were walking to America. I've done a lot of it. On some level, visually, it's not that interesting, you know. So to create a film which is capturing the tragedy of that and making it compelling, you know, that takes some skillful editing. And I'm not an editor, but I just tried to provide the best feedback I could while we went through that process.
Yeah, I would have to explain how uncomfortable I'd been to get that shot, and it doesn't really make any difference to the story. It's like how long you take to get a shot or how long you wait for it is there's a cold reality of whether it works or whether it doesn't. And sometimes your experience changes that. And I just want to say that, you know, the style of filmmaking that Sebastian and I have employed is very much related to Sebastian's work, whether it's The Perfect Storm, where there's characters and then science, or politics and then characters, and then there's only so much you can tell before people tune out. So you can give them the medicine, but then you have to give them the sugar, and that's, you know, that's always the balance that we discuss, is like how much, because I tend to go down the rabbit hole, and I may never come out unless Sebastian pulls me out by my feet.
What was the sugar? What was the sugar in this film?
And the story and the excitement, and then the medicine is the politics and the history. Like, but they exist. They don't exist, and they're not exclusive. They relate to each other, but you don't necessarily understand how they relate to each other until you've got a little bit further down the film.
Yeah.
So we were always trying to provide clues about why the caravan, why narcos, and why politicians are intersectional.
Yeah. I found that part of it extremely compelling, of how it came to this, even though it's not. I mean, it's still so complex. But when you were telling the story, you mentioned Trump on the escalator saying that the Mexicans are rapists. You mentioned the wall and the obsession over that. Was there any, to me, what was so relatable is when you talked about there being so much corruption all over the world in all these countries. Yes, we don't have that level yet, but there's no real preaching in this film. But there is a message for me, and I'm sure we'll be hearing from some other viewers soon too. There was a very, very chilling message of where lawlessness and the breakdown of institutions, how far that goes until there's no system in place. I mean, do you feel that that's a takeaway from American audiences watching this film?
Yeah, I mean, people need to survive, and they need to feel that they have agency in their lives, and that that they have access to justice. Mm-hmm. So if you feel that your vote doesn't count, if you feel that you cannot go to the courts for redress, if you feel that the police are actually biased against you and will go out of their way to hurt you or imprison you, when people start to feel that, they lose faith in the system, or that you have to pay a lot of money in order to get a license that anyone should have, a license to sell fruit on the street that anyone should have available to them. I mean, the Arab Spring started in Tunisia, and it was a guy, if I'm remembering correctly, it was a guy who had a fruit cart, he was being pressured by a cop to pay, extorted to pay a bribe for her to, I believe it was a female cop, for her to continue permitting him to sell his fruit. Mm-hmm. Completely outrageous. He set himself on fire. That started the Arab Spring. When people feel that they can't earn a legitimate living, mm-hmm. And have a say in their own future, then they resort to violent means. And, of course, once you institutionalize corruption, everybody's got to do that. Because it's stupid to play fair if no one else is playing fair. Then you're just an idiot, right? So that's how violence, that's how corruption perpetuates itself.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah, and the lack of safety. I mean, if, like you said, the police are, I was struck by that there's no distinction between organized crime and the police.
That's right.
Mm-hmm. No, it's a rule of authority, not the rule of law.
Yeah. So
what is a state meant to do? It's meant to help you resolve disputes. So if disputes are resolved by the will of the most powerful person, mm-hmm. that's not a fair and just system.
Right. Do you feel that there's that message that these many countries, including our own, that are sliding slowly into authoritarianism if we let it, that this is what has happened?
I think democracy is an incredible thing. It's one of the most beautiful of human inventions, but it's a massive collective act of trust. Mm-hmm. And that trust can break down. And, I think authoritarianism is, it's also unstable in its own way, but I think it's very easy for countries to slide into. And when people in any country, including this country, I mean, we're not used to thinking that this country might slip from democracy, but it's entirely possible. Mm-hmm. And what happens is the lack of trust reaches a critical mass, and then everyone fends for themselves because they don't think the state will protect them, that they have to protect themselves. And once people atomize like that, it takes an enormous amount of work to sort of put Humpty Dumpty back together again.
Yeah.
So what's the difference between trust and faith?
Is this a joke?
No, I'm not.
I mean, I think there's rational reasons for trust, and faith is faith. You just have faith, but they're not necessarily rational reasons for it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Oh, okay. I'm interested to see what our viewers have to ask for Nick and Sebastian. So I'm just going to ask a couple of their questions here. Okay. From Stephen. Has there been a country that has turned things around regarding corruption? If so, how did they do it?
That's a great question. Nick, I'm going to let you go first because I can't immediately think
Well,
of
I would say the United States turned it around. I mean, you could look at the corruption during Prohibition and the organized crime that existed, and you could even look further back and look at Tammany Hall in New York versus Fiera LaGuardia, and you could say, well, that was that corruption was turned around in a generation in America. Mm-hmm. Are there countries that have turned it around in less developed parts of the world? That's hard to say. Let me think of an example.
When I was watching it, I did think about what a stranglehold organized crime had on Sicily, and I don't know if that's truly been turned around, but I've seen documentaries and read accounts where it seems to be much better, and it began with a lot of public education to counter the mythology of the mob. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, and I think Sicily's an interesting example because you've got this cultural divide in Italy between Northern Italians and Southern Italians, and then the islanders. But that was a war that was waged, and there was basically the Cosa Nostra blew two federal judges out of their cars. I mean, when we talk about a bomb, they put a bomb underneath the expressway that blew up the expressway with the car on top of it. I mean, it was so there's less crime in Sicily. I don't know if there's less corruption.
Mm.
And
Naples is terrible. Like, there's still the trash doesn't get picked up on the street, and I think you could follow Diego Maradona around to the hotspots of corruption around the world.
Let me jump in with a counterintuitive thought. I'm no fan of the Taliban, mm-hmm. But what they came in on, the platform they came in on in 94, 95, 96 was an anti-corruption platform. They said, if you follow the way of Allah, we will clean up the corruption in Afghanistan. We'll end the civil war and we'll clean up the corruption in Afghanistan. And one of the reasons corruption is associated with radical Islamic movements is because that is often the issue that those movements use in order to curry favor with the population. Okay. And again, my friend Sarah Shays documented this in Afghanistan. Likewise, the Shabab in Somalia, Boko Haram in Nigeria. I mean, it's one of the common threads of these radical movements, and they actually do clean up corruption. They do it by taking people and shooting them in the back of the head who are corrupt. I mean, it's pretty effective. Yeah. Now that's harsh medicine, right? I mean, they bring all kinds of, in my opinion, other ills to the society, but they did turn corruption around.
Let me see, it's another question here. From Carl, your film shows two parallel tales of migrants and drug cartels, both very dramatic stories. Do you have thoughts about the intersection of these stories? I mean, you've addressed that somewhat, but if you could get specific about the intersection of those two, from Carl, the drug cartels and the migrants.
I mean, the intersection of the two stories. They actually, because of the way the Sinaloans do business, the drugs and the migrants were both crossing in Tijuana and in Mexicali. So in a physical location, they're exactly the same border crossings that were porous for both people and for drugs.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. Have you shown, this is from Ursita Films. Have you shown the film to the people in it, and how have they reacted to it?
Yeah, we've shown the film to pretty much everyone that's in the film, and everyone in the film has been very happy that they're part of the film.
Mm.
I don't think, I mean, we showed it to the characters, not the interviewees.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
the characters are very happy that they're in the film.
Mm.
In fact, I actually did a screening in Mexico City with Carlos, one of the photographers. We did a big thing at UNAM, which was, you know, he was very happy to show that, you know, what really happened in Acapulco.
Yeah. Have you been in touch with, I'm thinking of Lottie in particular, who decided to return?
Yeah, Nico's been in touch with her, one of our producers. She's moved to her aunt's house in the country, in the mountains of outside of San Pedro Sula. So, but she's not in cell phone range all the time. So we haven't been in much contact with her. But she did send those photos recently of her and her baby. So those are pretty recent photos.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And Saura and Shaurol are in New Jersey, and we hung out with them last month.
Yeah. Yeah, I saw that at the end of the... From Noor, how do you know when to turn on the camera ethically and in terms of finding something worth to capture?
I think it's when you turn the camera off.
Yeah. Well,
yeah, I mean, there's two decisions. I mean, the basic premise is you want to capture as much as you can that you think is compelling and interesting and reveals the truth, right? But then there are moments, and I had those at in Restrepo, where because out of concerns of a person's dignity or privacy, you're not abridging journalistic freedom at all to turn off the camera, because there are issues of human dignity and the invasion of privacy that you have to consider. And so that's, you know, you sort of know it when you see it. My default is to keep the camera running as long as people are reasonably comfortable with it, because there's a second level of decisions that come in the editing room, and that's where you apply all these other sort of ethical standards, like, you know, is it honest? Is it fair? Is it demeaning someone in a way that doesn't add to the accuracy of the film and that they might not even realize? You know, I mean, there are all these things you have to consider, but that final stop in the decision-making process is in the edit room. So basically the default is shoot as much as you possibly can, and those decisions come later.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. From Misha, do you think the migrants are losing their illusion about a better life in the USA, the American dream, after the death of Latin American children separated from their parents and put in cages? Are they realizing now that the USA has a president and its administration as corrupt, as hypocritical, and immoral as the leaders of their country?
That's a good question. I think you've seen a decrease in migration north, but I don't know whether it's directly related to the efforts of the executive branch and the CBP to stop people entering America as much as it is to do with the pandemic.
Wow.
I mean, would you want to leave Honduras to go to a country whose per capita death rate is more than yours at the moment?
Yeah, well, that's a good question. Are people still fleeing? I mean, I guess it would depend. I was the level of violence that's depicted in this film. That again, it's frightening. You might want to take your chances with something versus rape, pillage, and murder. I mean, it was chilling, the stories that they told.
In El Salvador, there's been a massive decrease in the death rate recently, and if you look at the papers recently, you might have noticed that a couple of diplomats got expelled from El Salvador.
Mm-hmm.
That's because it was discovered that Bukele was in direct negotiations with Maras in prison about a jobs reintegration program. So, if the murder rate is less, then people are going to, I think the Maras may have had an epiphany and decided to tax the people with money rather than people without the money.
I see. Yeah. Okay, let's try to get a couple more questions in. Well, Alma asked, where can I currently watch the film? Obviously missed it. Is there going to be another screening on National Geographic of Blood on the Wall?
September the 30th. September the 30th. I think it's at 7:30.
Okay, the 30th of September. Okay, yeah. Good. And will it be available ongoing through National Geographic, whether on demand or to folks who missed it or who see it and want to let people know? It's such an important film. Get the word out on its availability.
Yeah, I mean, it will play exclusively on National Geographic certainly for the first couple of months, and then I think it'll be available on iTunes, and eventually it will end up on its way onto Hulu, I'm sure.
Right. Okay, let's get one more in. The women that are in New Jersey, did they cross illegally because they had lost their papers, as shown earlier in the film?
Well, they crossed legally. Well, they crossed and then they were apprehended by the Border Patrol and then requested asylum. So, so they didn't do anything that was illegal. So
their application is pending. Yeah.
No.
Sebastian, did you?
No, I'm good.
Okay. I just want to we'll try to get one more in. I think we have a couple more minutes. Okay. Well, I know we don't have much time. I do want to ask about your next projects for both of you, since you're always, you've teamed together on such important work. Do you have another film planned? What are you each doing at this point?
I'm in the middle of finishing a book, and I've been out of New York City for some months now because of the pandemic. So, as has Nick, actually. So we haven't really had a chance to get together and plot, but we were always sort of and particularly Nick is always sort of cooking ideas. So I'm actually curious to hear what he has to say, because he's always got some good ideas for us to talk about.
Oh, you got something you want to share, Nick, that we can look forward to, or Sebastian will know what he's doing next?
A couple of things. We have a thing about the Diamond Princess, the boat that had the first COVID outbreak outside of China, and a bigger look at the cruise business in general. And then the other thing I'm working on is an investigation of the LA Sheriff's Department. The LA Sheriff's Department isn't what you think it is. It is not a paragon of propitious law enforcement. It's actually rife with sheriff gangs, and that's the ultimate hypocrisy and at least the criminals in gangs are just playing one side of the fence. The sheriff gangs are playing both sides of the fence.
Have you already started doing research on that?
Yeah.
No. It sounds like a compelling one. Where are you based, Nick?
I'm in upstate New York at the moment. Actually, my biggest problem while we were here is I saw one of my pigs escaped.
Oh. Are you on a farm?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I'm just thinking of this now because you talked about the long history you two have of working together. Did it begin with Rispestro? How did it start? How did you meet?
I was Tim Hetherington and I were collaborating on a project in Afghanistan documenting a platoon in combat off and on for a year. And I'd started this project. Tim came on my second trip and over there, and he said that he knew this amazing producer and filmmaker in New York who might want to look at our footage, because we had a lot of really dramatic footage. We were in a lot of combat. and it was 2007. So there wasn't much of that stuff that had come out of Afghanistan at that point. So we went to Nick, and Nick was like, we got to make this, and I'll help you any way I can. And it was, he was amazingly generous in extending a lot of editorial and post-production services that frankly, Tim and I could not afford up front. And it was Nick's generosity and vision that really helped that film get made.
It wouldn't have got made unless you'd have humped all the way over there and then humped up a hill.
Well,
no, I mean, I knew Tim, because it's funny. There's another person we need to mention is James Brabazon, and it's sort of James, Tim, and I sort of all are tall Englishmen that like to, are fascinated by other cultures and other parts of the world, and we're both big and both sound the same, and it's just like three big gringos in difficult places always have a lot to talk about over a couple of beers.
Wow. There's so many questions. I'm going to get one more in before we have to wrap from Carol. There were mentions of U.S. intervention in South and Central America and the terrible results. Do you expect any pushback to clear the film for broadcast?
No, there's nothing that isn't true.
Mm-hmm.
So there's no, from a compliance basis, from a fact check basis, this is everything in the film is double sourced. There's nothing controversial in this film. It's just the way you put the pieces together creates the narrative. I think that the American public has generally sees things in microbytes. They see news articles and they see television with commercials in it, and they never step back and say, well, hold on a second, that piece and that piece are actually linked because they're 3 weeks apart in a news cycle. Mm-hmm. So no, I have zero issue with any of the political history in this film. Mm-hmm. And neither is Fox or Disney now. Mm-hmm. So we've run through 2 compliance departments.
Okay, great. Okay, one more from Demi. One of the interesting stories within the context of this film is the role of U.S. banks in this drug trafficking. Who is holding them accountable? Any reactions from them with regard to the film?
We haven't had any reaction from the banking industry yet. Who holds them accountable? Well, I think that's a big issue, and I don't think at the moment anyone's holding banks accountable. Mm-hmm. They literally, the free market didn't mean free for all, and that's how the banks interpreted it. Mm-hmm. Was there any pushback? Yeah, well, the HSBC got fined. There's been a few slaps on the wrist, but as we said, until you hold the executives criminally responsible for the laundering of money, then there's no chance that you're going to see any down trend in the amount of money that's, it's, look, one of the guys I met with is like, listen, I've got $350 million in this room, but that's a room full of cash. Mm-hmm. That you can't do very much with a room full of cash. You have to turn it into digital money nowadays in order for it to be useful to buy anything. You can't buy a boat with cash. You can't buy artwork with cash. You can buy cocaine with cash, but that's still in, so until you can hold those people responsible, then there's not going to be any, there's going to be no change.
Yeah. Okay, we're unfortunately out of time. This is an amazing topic. It's such an important film. So on September 30th on National Geographic, Blood on the Wall. It's been a real illuminating conversation. Sebastian Junger and Nick Quested. Thank you so much for being here, co-directors of the film.
Thank you, Aaron. Thank you, Erica.
Thank you very much, guys.
Thank you. It's great. Thank you so much. Bye, everyone. Thanks for attending. Bye-bye.